Welcome to the Restoration Activation Project video series. Hi, Marianne here, and thank you for joining me. In my last commentary, I explored various potential unfoldments around the nearing convergence point of this consciousness evolution cycle, as well as touching on the correlative upturn in so-called paranormal phenomena and events. This episode will delve more deeply into some of the paranormal aspects of these unfoldments, as well as their implications and correlation to the current global scale draconian measures being imposed upon our society right now. My dear friend and colleague, James Bartley, one of the go-to authorities in the area of paranormal phenomena, is joining me today to share some of his insights and perspectives around an array of different phenomena. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with James and his important groundbreaking work, he has been researching alien abductions and the military aerospace connection to UFOs and alien life forms for more than 25 years. He's a protege of legendary alien abduction researcher Barbara Barthollet of Tulsa, Oklahoma. James spent years conducting field investigations in the high desert of Southern California, Arizona, and Nevada. He specializes in research and investigations into reptilian aliens and military abductions. He's also an independent historian with an emphasis on military history, intelligence and counterintelligence, and special ops. James has given lectures at locations all around the world. He regularly conducts highly informative interviews with a wide array of tuned-in researchers and investigators and other individuals, which you'll find on his website. I strongly encourage you to become a member, which gives you access to the second half of his interviews and commentaries, wherein he and his guests go much deeper into the topics at hand. And James is also a skilled consultant in these areas. I've included a link to his website below this video, and I hope you'll check it out. And as always, the information provided in all of my material that I put out there is not put forth for the purpose of either fear-mongering or sensationalizing these topics. This knowledge and any accompanying insights are shared with the express intention of assisting serious self-master warrior souls in their efforts to co-creationally align with their encoded mission during these turbulent cycle end times. Welcome, James. Thank you for joining me. It's such a treat for you to be here.
Thank you, Marianne. It's a treat for me as well. It's quite an honor and a privilege, and I've been really looking forward to this discussion with you.
Yeah, I have too. This is good stuff, important information. We really need to bring stuff home here for people, because this is not just fun and games anymore, as being clearly evinced by what's going on around us in the dense material reality. So before we dive in, though, James, maybe you could provide listeners who might be unfamiliar with you and your work with just a brief overview of your background and kind of what led you into this particular field of research and investigation.
Yes, Marianne. I've always been interested in paranormal, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, I had a number of interesting experiences, psychic phenomena, UFO sightings, very interesting dreams, oftentimes UFO ET related. And I thought that was the norm. I didn't know any different. I thought that my dreams and my experiences and my psychic experiences were being experienced en masse, like this was something that happened to everybody. It was only much later that I realized that, although many people across the board may experience psychic phenomena of one sort or another, they may not be attuned to that fact. They may not be aware that they're having these experiences because they're too distracted for whatever reason. But I always knew that this phenomena aspect was around me. And at an early age, I delved into reading about Greek mythology, about various types of phenomena, the Bermuda Triangle, UFOs, Bigfoot. and I've always been interested in military history as well. So those two things kind of go hand in hand. And where the twain met, much later down the track, I realized that there were deep black elements of the military intelligence community, the aerospace industry, that were deeply involved in the back engineering and development of advanced craft based on alien technology, which they had recovered through the various UFO crashes, crash retrievals, as well as what we've come to find out, my colleagues and I, that there has been an ongoing interaction between elements of the deep black military aerospace community and, for lack of a better term, non-human life forms, one alien group or another, if you will. So over the years, I just immersed myself in a study and of all these experiences to gain greater understanding, because I was having experiences. And it all came to a head in 1990 when I came back from Germany. I spent a summer there, and I just had a number of experiences, UFO-wise, in San Jose, California, culminating in a full-blown waking consciousness alien abduction encounter when 3 reptilian greys came into my bedroom, and they abducted me. They took me up into the very large craft, and things kind of like unraveled from there. I woke up the next morning a basket case, very frightened, very traumatized, but because I've always had this love of learning and love of reading, I knew that the only way I can come to grips with all this was to immerse myself in reading everything I could about UFOs and aliens. So although I've always had an interest in the subject, when 1990 rolled around and I had those experiences, it really compelled me to delve deeper and deeper. And I did a life inventory, what I call a life inventory, around that period of time. And I got like a pad of yellow legal paper, and I just wrote down off the top of my head all the phenomena I could remember going back to childhood. And after several pages, I realized that whatever had been going on had been with me all my life. And so that, in a nutshell, is how this came about. And over the years, once I became actively involved as an investigator, there were significant milestones in my life. I became a close confidant and protege of Barbara Bartholick, the late great alien abduction researcher from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I became close colleagues and friends with our mutual friend, Eve Lorgan, and others. And we did a lot of research in Southern California and in the high desert of Southern California, Nevada, Arizona, that tri-states Southwest desert region. So that's kind of my background. And I'm living in Australia these days, and I've plugged into some key networks here as far as UFO research and that kind of thing. So in a nutshell, that's how I got into all this, Marianne.
That's absolutely fascinating. No matter how many times I hear it, your journey and your journey makes perfect sense in light of your background. But I guess the part that I've always found so interesting but understandable is so much activity in your childhood that you just grew up thinking that this was the norm. That is just, that's fascinating and very telling, revealing as to the extent that it was going on. It's like, oh, okay, this is just what happened. So thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that. Now we're going to get into some of the, and I'm like you, I've never really liked the word paranormal, but that's the word I'm going with for today, just to keep it simple. But I'm going to get into some of these specifics that I mentioned in my last commentary. And I guess as good a place to start as any is with cryptids. Now, for those of you who don't know what cryptids are, they are anomalous aquatic or semi-aquatic, terrestrial, or even winged creatures, including even a variety of humanoids. For example, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, basically, they're all interconnected somehow. You've probably heard of like the Jersey Devil or chupacabras are lichens and werewolves, thunderbirds, dogmen, mothmen, giant serpents, leviathans. For example, the Loch Ness Monster are just a few examples of these. So, James, I know you have interviewed some really sharp people out there in the field investigating cryptids, and perhaps you can share a bit of that information with us, kind of touch on the ones that kind of come to mind most for you, and perhaps some of the areas of the world in which um, these sightings are taking place, and maybe, similar sightings are taking place in multiple locations. But I know sometimes there's hot spots for certain of these type of beings. So go to town.
Well, thank you, Marianne. I've had sightings of cryptids myself.
Mm.
My wife Kylie and I were driving back from Sydney, and we got lost, and we found ourselves going up this lonely hill with thick brush on either side, and we're creeping along, and we can only see to the extent of the headlight beams. And we both, although we didn't say it at the time, we both felt that we were under observation, that we were being watched. We had a very strong feeling of that. Me, I'm thinking, oh, aliens are going to be abducted, right? Well, what happened was we're creeping along at very low speed, going up this hill. We couldn't even turn around. There was just no space to do that because the brush came right up to the edge of the very narrow road we were on. So we had no choice but to keep going, to the top of this hill and beyond, down to the other side. And as we're creeping along, and it's pitch black out there, Marianne, from left to right, right in front of the car, right in our headlight beam, this small furry humanoid kind of did a sidestep from left to right. It had its arms out, and it looked like, if you can envision the letter X, but doing a sidestep across from left to right, right in front of us, right? It was a little slight hair-covered being. It wasn't stout, it wasn't muscular. I don't know if it was a baby infant Yowie, what they call Sasquatch here.
Mm-hmm.
There's also another race of beings similar to other parts of the world where the natives, they have a name which I cannot pronounce for it, and it varies from nation, tribe to tribe. But they describe these little beings that are hairy.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, and I think that's what this being was. I don't think it was a baby Sasquatch or a baby Yowie. I think it was one of these little hairy fellows, right? And it had the trickster thing going on, so it did this sidestep, kind of like a vaudeville kind of sideshow act, from left to right, right in front of us, with its arms extended, face on to us. Kylie screamed. I said, "What?" Now, I know what I saw, and I had a strong suspicion that I knew what she was screaming about, but I didn't elaborate. I just wanted to get out of there, right? Because if you see one small one, there could be more of them, or there could be bigger ones, right?
Exactly.
So Kylie screams, I scream, "What?" Even though we both saw what we did, and then we just creep over the mountain, get to down the other side. Thankfully, we found a way to get back onto the main motorway and head back home. Now, it was three days later, I think it was. In a quiet moment, I asked her, "Well, you remember when we were going up that hill and it was all dark, and then you screamed, and I screamed, 'What?' Right?" And she goes, "Yes. Well, I'll tell you what I saw." And then I described to her what I just explained. This little fellow, hairy fellow came out of the bush from left to right
How
and
tall
did a
was it?
sidestep. And then she said, "That's exactly what I saw too. That's why she screamed." Okay. So another time when I saw a cryptid, this was in Bullhead City, Arizona. And for those of you not familiar with the region, this is Mojave County, northwestern corner of Bullhead City, right by the tri-states border. So Needles, California is not too far to the west. Directly north is Laughlin, Nevada, across the Colorado River. And 90 miles north of Laughlin is Las Vegas. Anyway, I'm coming back home from work. And if memory serves, Marianne, it was one of those weird times living in Arizona. Arizona never changes their time zones. Okay, they always stay the same, right? And so the problem was I worked in Nevada, in Laughlin, right? So when the daylight savings kicked in, you can basically add an hour in the morning for me and an hour coming back, losing it, coming back to Arizona, but simply by crossing the bridge back into Arizona, if you get my drift, okay? So let's say like I start 8 a.m. in Nevada across the river. Well, that's 7 a.m. in Arizona where
Right.
I'm living, which means that if I have to get up an hour before I start and get my day going. So I'm getting up at 6 or 5 a.m., right? So I cross the bridge at, say 6:30, get onto the Nevada side, whammo at 7:30. I do my 8-hour shift. And then, by the time I leave there, it's like, 6 p.m. I cross back over and it's like, the time changes again. So the reason I bring this up is I was dog tired when I was driving home that night. And I'm I'm driving on Bullhead City Parkway, and I'm about to get to the point where I make a right turn and go up into our community, tucked away in these foothills. And I see loping towards me, and it wasn't loping, it was actually just trotting. A very large, in my headlights, it's dark already, and I've seen large coyotes when I was there. So this wasn't a large coyote. And I see kind of like trotting or walking on 4 legs towards me an immensely long canine type, long and tall canine type animal. And I knew immediately in my mind cryptid, right?
Right.
Back then, I didn't know. This was circa 2004, Bullhead City,
Okay.
2004, 2005, thereabouts. The term dogman wasn't well known back then. I don't know when that really came into popular usage in our field, right? All I was thinking was, this is some kind of weird cryptid. I've never seen it before. So I'm driving slowly towards it, and I'm sitting in the driver's seat, Marianne, and this thing was up, and it was on all fours, was up above my shoulder, kind of maybe as high as the roof of my car, right? And it was on all fours. And
Wow.
some of the dog men, they run either on 2 legs or on 4 legs. It just depends on, what's going on.
Yes.
And so it was one of those WTF moments. I'm looking over. This thing is mere, 2 or 3 feet from me. And I'm looking in the side view mirror, still having a head scratching moment, looking in the rear view. And the reason I brought up the time zone difference and all that stuff was I was dog tired. Normally, I may have just turned around and checked this thing out. You know what I mean? Which in hindsight, I'm glad I didn't, because a lot of people have had rather frightening encounters with dogmen before. So I just kept looking at this thing slowly as it's headed back out into the desert. I'm looking at the back end of it. Okay, from the front end, it had kind of a lighter head, kind of a mane. Its fur was kind of a grayish, whitish, lighter color. I don't know if it had to do with the time of the season or what, but around the neck area, there seemed to be tufts, kind of a mane kind of thing. But even on all fours, it was immensely tall
I
at
can't
the
believe,
shoulder.
I can't believe how
So
long. Yeah.
yes, yes. And I had Jody Cook, the director and founder of the North American Dogman Project, on my show. He said, on all fours, some of these things are bigger at the shoulder than the height of cars, right? So what I saw wasn't even really unusual or even extraordinary by dogman standards. So it was one of those effort moments. I'm not going to slow down, do a U-turn, and follow this thing. It just kind of trotted away back out in down Bullhead Parkway, headed out into the desert. And I was always baffled by that experience. And then for many years, I didn't think nothing much about it. All I knew was it was a cryptid of some kind. It was
Right.
not a wolf. It was not a coyote. It was not a big dog. It was something else, but it was probably, whatever it was kind of in the canine kind of wolf family, if you will. And it was only later when a lot of these stories of dogmen started coming out. And I've already spoken to colleagues who'd had encounters with humanoid wolf beings um, in the past. Uh, this thing never stood up; it just remained on all fours. But I've since come to understand that they can stand up, they can walk on two legs, and become bipedal, can even run very fast on two legs. So that was my dogman encounter. And as far as the researchers I've had Eric Altman on quite recently. You can find his interview on my show. He's an outstanding veteran researcher from Pennsylvania. And like myself, Marianne, he had the very great good fortune of coming under the wing and being mentored by one of the all-time greats, Stan Gordon, who I'd love to have on my show.
Oh, yeah.
He's a great UFO researcher. He investigated the Kecksburg UFO crash
Mm-hmm.
in 1965. And he also wrote a book, which I have, about the UFO wave in Pennsylvania, which also included a number of Bigfoot sightings in very close proximity to the UFOs. So there was a direct correlation in time and place between the appearance of these UFOs and these big hairy beings, right? So, and it was around a period of time that was 73 going into 74. Around 74, 75, I had this terrifying dream of a gleaming silver saucer landing in the very busy avenue in front of our house in San Jose, California. No other vehicle traffic, uh, you know, going left to right or right to left. Paradoxically, this thing in broad daylight in the dream just settled down right on the avenue in front of my house. And then I was with my brother in the dream, and we looked at each other in consternation. And then we looked back out the window, and now there's a ramp that's descended from this gleaming silver saucer.
Mm.
And then next thing you know, these three large Sasquatch kind of beings, kind of like a yellow ochreish long hair, like yellow ochreish color, but very long, almost spiky hair. Three of them descended from the craft, and they proceeded to make this god awful sound that I won't try to replicate here. Uh, and then they looked, well, they were headed towards the side gate to gain access to the house through the backyard. And then there's a side door there too. So my brother and I were freaking out. And then I ran outside to go to the side gate and make sure it was bolted from the inside, right? All the while these beings were making this horrible sound. And so I wasn't aware until much later that there was this Bigfoot UFO connection. But here I am having this dream of these three Sasquatch type beings alighting from this parked UFO in front of my house, terrifying me in the process. So it was interesting to come across Stan Gordon's work many years later, where there was a wave of sightings in Pennsylvania where these Sasquatch type beings would be seen in very close proximity to UFOs. And so I had Eric Altman, Stan Gordon's protege and close colleague, on my show talking about, his work. And Eric has done a lot of field research at Chestnut Ridge in Pennsylvania. Now, as you know, Marianne, those of us in the field, once in a while, we hit a bonanza. We just wind up right time, right place, a
Right.
particular locale where all kinds of stuff is happening. For me and my colleagues, that was in the high desert of Southern California uh, in the early, mid, and late 90s. We did a lot of stuff there. Going into the 2000s, there was always stuff going on in the high desert of Southern California if you knew where to look. And so it was with Eric Altman and his fellow researchers and his team there in Pennsylvania. Chestnut Ridge is a very long ridge, and they have UFO activity there, big feline cat activity, cryptid cat activity, Sasquatch UFO activity, all kinds of stuff, uh, light phenomena, orbs, that kind of thing. And kudos to Lon Strickler, one of the great old school
Oh, yes. I love his
cryptid,
work.
yeah,
Yes.
cryptid UFO researchers. He does the Phantoms and Monsters blog, which I encourage everyone to go to. And Lon was kind enough to introduce me to Eric Altman. And Lon was also kind enough to introduce me to David Eckardt, who is a legitimate reptilian abductee who's had gobs of experiences with reptilians opening portals and stargates right in his home and coming in and out. And a close friend of mine, Lorena Smith, I've had her on my show. She went through a similar thing in the um, early mid 90s, going into the late 90s in the high desert of Southern California, not too far from Victorville, where there were these portal entries in her house in various places. And reptilians would step right out of these portals into her home. And the room that had the most activity was the children's bedroom. And out of the closet, there was a portal entry in this closet. And me and my colleague, Craig Bowers, I've also had him on my show, we would spend weekends there, or whenever we can get away from our jobs, we would go to Lorena's house in the high desert of Southern California. Craig would come down from Vegas and I would come up from San Diego. We'd rendezvous, flip a coin. Whoever won slept on the bed. Whoever lost slept on the floor in a sleeping bag. And we spent many nights in that children's bedroom and Lorena tells her story on Monsters and Mysteries in America, where this little immature reptoid, basically a juvenile, immature baby reptoid, was coming out of the closet and had befriended her daughter. Her daughter is now an adult. I mean, I held her daughter as a little girl. I mean, that's how old I am. It's like I've watched these kids grow up to become, mothers in their own right, right? But when she was a little girl, her daughter had befriended this little reptilian. And she was telling her mom, can you give me some food so I can share it with my friend? And Lorena, despite all the experiences she had in that house, she just assumed that her daughter had had this imaginary friend, right? So to humor her, she makes an extra serving. I can't remember if it was pizza or it was peanut butter and jelly. But she walks into the children's bedroom, with an extra plate for her invisible friend. And she walks into the door, and there on the floor of the bedroom is her daughter interacting with a little reptilian being.
My
The
God.
little reptilian looks up at Lorena and runs into the closet and disappears. Okay. Now,
Let me imagine as a mother. Oh my God. The terror of a mother seeing that.
yes, yes,
Oh,
yes, you can imagine, and all the activity that would go on in there at night. I know I'm jumping all over the place, but I'm kind of giving a background of some of the work we did because this is the kind of stuff we had to deal with. I was knocked out by one of those little reptilians before. That's a whole nother story. Uh, I was like punched right in the face and knocked unconscious. But I'm glad it didn't claw me and scratch me. That would have been worse. But it just punched me out basically. So the point of relevance was the aforementioned David Eckardt, who Lon Strickler introduced me to. I've had David Eckardt on my show, and David had similar things where these portals would open up, and reptilians and other creatures. Now he's describing these new group of aliens that he'd never seen before. Different groups are showing up, and I made a joke to Lon Strickler when he was on my show. That he's been on my show a couple of times. I said, well, it's almost like the aliens have got like a gray line bus tour going on at David Eckardt's house, where they just like show up and they say, okay, here's the human who lives in this habitat, and look them over and study them, and then they go on their merry way, right? And that's what David's life has been like.
Oh my.
Yes, and so, and Lon is one of those great old school researchers, and he has the spirit of cooperation, the spirit of helpfulness,
Yes.
of kinship, and brotherhood. Because a lot of researchers out there, they're very selfish. They view their witnesses and their friends as assets and possessions of their own.
Right.
Oh, what do you want to do? Talk to my abductees for? They're my witnesses. They're my abductees. Well, these people are adults. They can talk to anyone they want, right? And as long as your heart is in the right place, and Lon knows you're a good guy, yeah, he'll introduce me to the people, because he's been in for a long time. I've been in this field for 30 plus years now. That was an old bio he read of me. So like I've been doing this for over 30 years now. And Lon's been doing it much longer because he's older than me. So, he's introduced me to David Eckardt. He's introduced me to Eric Altman, and he's done a great job. He's got his own podcast, Arcane Radio. So,
Yes.
I encourage the listeners. So the point of relevance is I've had Jody Cook, the director of North American Dogman Project, on my show. I've had Mike Patterson, who's an outstanding.
Oh yes, I love him.
Yeah, outstanding. He's gone through a lot of harassment too. An outstanding Bigfoot Sasquatch researcher who's actually, excuse me, developed kind of a mutual trust with a tribe of Sasquatch in the wilds of Ontario, Canada. Right. He's got great vocalizations.
Neff.
Neff, exactly, and also there is the metaphysical, interdimensional
Yes, I want you to
aspect of
touch on that
Sasquatch.
for a minute. Yeah, many of these creatures have this. That's become very apparent in many, if not most, of these sightings. But getting back to what you touched on a little earlier, the UFO connection. What do you think's going on with that? Or do you think that in some cases that they show up to open portals, and then in other cases maybe some of these beings can open the portals themselves, or are they kind of just keeping an eye on things? What do you think about that?
I think it's a mixed bag. I'm not suggesting that all hairy hominoid, large Sasquatch type beings have this metaphysical, interdimensional capability, but
Right.
clearly some do.
Yeah.
And these Sasquatch type beings, Daryl Sims, old school, he's from your neck of the woods, Houston, old school UFO abduction researcher from way back. I knew Daryl years ago. And, half in jest or what, I don't know. He used to refer to these Sasquatch-looking beings that were seen on board the UFOs. He used to refer to them as the Wookiees, right? Because
Perfect.
makes sense to me, right?
Me too.
So and he showed me some sketches and talked about them, right? So not only do some of these Sasquatch type beings, Yowie beings, Yowies they're called in Australia, have the means to open up their own portals, right? Because one of the top cryptozoologists in the world is an Australian guy named Rex Gilroy. He's getting up there in age, but he's written gobs of books and been doing this for several decades, right? He's been harassed and had his phone tapped and all this other stuff over the years by the Black Ops here in Australia. He was at a place that we call the glyphs here. There's a place where, if you're familiar with the story, and it's not too far from where I live, there is a sacred Aboriginal site, and within the sacred Aboriginal site, not only are there glyphs and carvings by the Aboriginals, but there was a shipwreck um, of Egyptians a long time ago. And these Egyptians, they made it to shore, and there were two brothers apparently. There were princes. One of them got bit by a poisonous snake, of which there's plenty there. I've seen them. And, when I went bushwalking out there where these glyphs are, I've seen a very large brown snake, which is very poisonous. And apparently one of these princes, one of these brothers was bitten by a snake, died. And they carved out the story on these walls of this glyph, these glyphs, right? And the debunkers have tried to say, oh no, that's just a hoax, yada, yada, yada. No, nonsense. When you're in there, you see how high they are up on these walls, and you see how all these big, massive rocks and stuff have been moved and shifted around in such a remote place. No one's going to go to that much trouble for a hoax. And it turned out, somebody determined that that's not even normal hieroglyphics. It was a dialect. It was like an ancient Egyptian dialect of hieroglyphics, right? So it was a form of crypto-proto-Egyptian. So whoever did the hoax, quote unquote, somehow they knew Proto-Egyptian on top of that. But the point of relevance is Rex Gilroy was conducting a field investigation above that site where the glyphs were. Next thing you know, like right by him, this portal opens up, and out of it walks a big Yowie, right? They look at each other. The Yowie looks at Rex. Rex looks at the Yowie, and the Yowie abruptly turns around and walks back into the portal and disappears. And so that was an example of a Sasquatch type being creating a portal for itself. And Mike Patterson talked about a case where he spoke to a hunter up in a blind in a tree, and the hunter looked down and he saw a big Sasquatch walk by below him, and next thing you know, there was a bright flash of blue light, and the Sasquatch disappeared. And so, we have to take these kinds of incidences into account, because we cannot assume that these are just big hairy mammals or anthropoids or primates or something. They seem to, at least some of them, have this metaphysical capability, the ability to make objects appear in midair. They've gifted Mike like stones and crystals and marbles and stuff that just pop up out of nowhere. And they have this ability to telepathically speak to people, and they have the ability to show up in people's dreams too, and talk to them. And I myself have had kind of mystical experiences with what I believe to be a Sasquatch. So there's definitely something to that. I believe that the fundamental constants are changing. I believe that energetically we're in a flux state where the veils between worlds are thinning. And according to Native American elder lore, according to the lore of the Aborigines throughout Australia and other First Nation peoples around the world, some of these so-called cryptids seem to know where the doorways are. that link the worlds, connect the worlds. So, as in the case of the Skinwalker Ranch, where they were seeing these humongous wolves, right? And people would fire bullets into them at point blank range, have absolutely no effect.
Totally didn't phase them. That's right.
It didn't even phase them, right? And if one's familiar with that story, I read the book. A guy was looking through an infrared scanner, and he saw a portal open up, and like a big being stepped through it. And then the being telepathically communicated with him and said, "We are observing you," something to that effect. Because, see, they took the overly scientific approach.
Yes.
You have to have a nice balance between science and metaphysics. I would have brought a team that included some top uh, intuitives, right?
Yes.
Because they relied strictly on technology, and these entities of all stripes just kept messing with the technology and made it very difficult for them to get any tangible proof, even though they were all over the place doing all kinds of stuff. So it was just one of those things. But I can elaborate on that and other things more, as we go along.
Well, it's just fascinating, and you touched on a key point here. All of this turmoil, this energetic turmoil that's going on as we, we're in the way I refer to the evolution cycle, the phase that we're in, and it's very much analogous to the birthing process. It's like
Oh, yes.
a cosmic birthing process, and what we're experiencing right now is a major contraction. And you know what happens in childbirth, the more intense and more frequent the contractions come, the nearer the quote birthing, point is. And this cycle is no different. And it's not even, these kinds of things that you're describing obviously have been going on for who knows how long. But what I have found really fascinating, and this has shown up in my work with clients, friends, just within the last, I would say, year, and even more so in the last 6 months, that people who have gone their whole lives and who aren't even, let's just say, they really don't even like talking about these kinds of things. They aren't involved in any of this. Nobody knows. Typically, and I'm the only person in their lives that knows anything even related to that. And they've come to me and said that they've awakened, perhaps, they're in their 50s or 60s, and say, for the first time in my life, I've had vivid memories of perhaps an alien abduction, or
Mm.
perhaps, these things, these kinds of things are being awakened right now. We're just flooded with this influx of both progressive and regressive energies into this
Oh,
reality.
yes.
And it's kind of also like, after a storm or during a storm, a major storm at sea, literally a tidal wave, the wave of transition, all of the stuff, the dregs at the bottom of the sea or the ocean or the bay come to the surface. And so I kind of, it's kind of analogous to that for me. But all of this activity is really getting more stirred up. I'm also aware that a lot more people, and we can kind of phase into that, are having more, again, I'll call them paranormal experiences, but along the lines of like apparitions and shadow
Yes.
people, and the classic black mass and demonic entities, things that people describe that you can't even describe, creatures, like anything from a gargoyle looking thing to spider like creatures, and
Yes. It's a mixed
runs the gamut.
bag. The veils are extraordinarily thin, and I believe that because the powers that be on this planet are of such a dark, excuse me, uh, evil density, and all the evil they perpetrate, all the rituals they conduct, the
Yes.
never-ending warfare on the planet, and also the way that they just pollute the environment. And I believe it's all an attempt to drive the frequency bandwidth even lower.
Oh,
The
yeah.
chemtrails, the 5G, everything, and for lack of a better term, the dumbing down process of the masses of humanity, where so many, unfortunately, they lack basic self-awareness. They lack self-awareness, and as a result, they don't have situational awareness, as soldiers in combat or military pilots talk about, the ability to take in what's going on at a glance, and then also an intuitive um, underlay or overlay, if you will, where we can tune into our surroundings like an animal does and determine if there's danger, right? And while so many people on the surface here, they lost or never had that ability because this long-term indoctrination, brainwashing process has been going on for so long. And I must remind the listeners that what we're seeing on the surface, the social distancing, the wearing the mask, the draconian measures for an alleged epidemic in which the actual number of cases are infinitesimal, just a minute percentage of the population is actually, if this thing even exists, even by the admission of health organizations, they're pointing out that not many people have this. And yet when people die, and many people are dying because they're being denied critical surgeries, critical medical care, deemed non-essential, right? That's eugenics all over again.
Yes.
So when people die, they're automatically lumped into the COVID-19 coronavirus death category. And there's a financial incentive
Oh,
for
yes.
doctors. So everything's all mixed up. But the point of relevance, Marianne, is that all this is an example, an in-your-face example of the evil. And see, they can keep it at arm's length. Oh, us, the government, we're not responsible for this. It's the virus. We're trying to protect you. All these things that we're doing to you, the lockdowns, and you can't go to parks and you can't go fishing on your own. That's to protect you. And then they lie about everything. And now they're saying that. Oh, because the cases have started to go down, right? The incidents, it's because we've kept you indoors, right?
Yeah.
So it's this big daddy kind of thing that's going on, it's this big daddy thing kind of going on. And I can only see it getting, all this needs to happen, Marianne. There's a revealing underway. There's a big, it's an apocalyptic scenario.
I couldn't agree more. Yes, it's very much, to use that term, apocalyptic is very apropos, the time of revelations. And we can get into this more a little bit later after we get through some more topics. But the whole interdensity dimensional thing, the uplifting, the features of the fourth or perhaps higher densities bleeding through. But I think this also might tie into the actual, we may already be into the actual quote reset process, where this reality is basically, it's inbuilt to shed those things. In particular, a lot of the third and lower density dimension aspects of this reality. So yes, it very much is about that, and I really like your input on that in a bit. And we'll just continue with some of your, I know there's been very much heightened, very much an upturn in the frequency. Well, let's put it this way. I know that there are a whole lot more reports of all the kind of things we're talking about, and that of course never reveals that's just like the pinhead, the little dot in the number of people that are actually having experiences that would never report them. So your thoughts on that, and please continue, if you would, in the area of apparitions and those kind of things, aka ghosts or disincarnate spirits and demon type entities and so forth.
Well, I've had a good friend of mine who'd be a great guest on your show. If she feels like coming back and doing interviews again, Sue Plavetic. I've had her on my show, and what Sue does is she's a clairaudient, clairvoyant, and lack of a better term, she's a house cleaner. If there's like troublesome spirits or entities or portals that need to be closed, and entities kind of sent on their way, right? She's the person to call. And she talked about how she is seen at this, it was a big communications tower. I don't know if it was a 5G tower or what, but she said there was all kinds of, and she saw this with her etheric third eye vision, all these really dark, kind of negative, dark energy blobs that were swirling around the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
As if it was like either making it possible for them to come into our reality, or they were somehow getting a feed off of it or something. But at any rate, it was like chum in the water, and these things were kind of like in a feeding frenzy mode, just kind of flying around this tower. And she also told me another story where she was clearing out this house. This family was having all these problems with paranormal phenomena, and it was causing problems for the house, for the family. And she kept seeing these dark, shadowy figures, kind of like wearing capes. I'm trying to remember her story. They were kind of wearing capes, and they kind of stood off in the background. And long story short, it turned out that one of the structures, one of the buildings in the environment, in the neighborhood rather, was, I got to ask her for clarification of the story, but it was either a mortuary, or it was, oh, no, it was an abortion clinic. That's what it was. There was an
Oh.
abortion clinic in the neighborhood, and these dark entities were hanging in and around this abortion clinic, right?
Mm.
So, and the abortion clinics are in the news because they keep getting busted for, selling baby parts and of
Oh, it's
aborted
awful. That
babies. It
energy.
is,
Oh,
yes, it's just so ghoulish, right? And that's what we're talking about, folks. That
yes.
in order for them to maintain control, they have to push down the vibe so much. And the way people are today, everyone's fearful, and so many people are wearing masks, and because they've been conditioned to point and shriek,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's, oh, that's a climate change denier, oh, that's someone, that's a white male, that's someone who believes in gun ownership, point and shriek, that's someone who's a racist. All these things are emotional, laced uh, memes and vibes that they're hurled out. These people have been conditioned through the media, through the schools, the universities, because it's all cultural Marxist programming to be in victim aggressor mode. And all that was leading up to nowadays, where if you're in certain places and you're not wearing a mask, you'll just be set upon by all these fearful people who've been shunted into the reptilian brain. So I tend to think that we've been in the fourth dimension for some time now.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
that, yeah, I think that when we're in a state where, in an environment where we can see things clearly, but the people around us cannot, we might as well be like in a different dimension entirely. Unfortunately, we have to share the same dimension. So I think that all of this provides the means for these apparitions, for these ghostly phenomena. Before this lockdown occurred, I had occasion to go to the haunted house in Las Vegas, and what a what an experience that was. And it's not just like a normal haunted house, folks. If you've never been there, what this guy has done is he's collected from all over the world haunted artifacts, actual tools, daggers used in satanic rituals.
Oh,
The
yeah.
basement of this place was actually a place where satanic rituals were performed. It was a very dark, dark, deep, dark vibe in this place.
Well,
And
I think there's a huge momentum being built now, too. And frankly, with all of the invocations that have been going on, like
oh yes,
satanic ritual. Look, think about how many people, for example, in the New Age community, who are doing invocations without even knowing it.
they don't even know it.
They don't even know. And frankly, I believe, in my humble opinion, my theory around this is that, and it's all part of the greater process. There's things that we just can't understand from a 3D perspective, no matter how much awakened some of our abilities may be getting. But there is this, I have an intuition around the the whole business, that they're basically losing control. The of like demonic forces and things like that, the interdensity, the non-human species, the top of the tier overseers of this reality. I'm getting this, like I said, this sense that they're basically kind of losing control. There is so much of the regressive forces and beings here now that sometimes I feel like that they're kind of not on top of things any more than, for example, the people deep, 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 deep behind government and politics and behind the secret societies, people that the names will never hear, deeper than perhaps even the quote 13 families, for example. I get this sense that they're basically kind of losing control over all that has been invoked. What do you think about that?
I would agree with you. And what's happened just the other day with this clearly to me, reptilian hybrid rage-filled cop who killed that poor Mr. Floyd, and right there in public, and it was videotaped, and it set off all these riots.
Yes.
Now, excuse me. Unfortunately, the looting and all that stuff, that's the kind of stuff that happens when you have people. You're going to find people of all stripes doing all kinds of different things, right? Now, the powers that be are kind of in a quandary. They can't deploy the normal forces they would, Antifa and these cultural Marxist type groups, social justice warriors, because, and this is an interesting irony, and again, very sad that poor Mr. Floyd had to be, the martyr in this case. But if it had been a white person that was killed, you would not have had this hue and cry. There would have been a protest. If anything, the corporate media would have labeled the protesters as neo-Nazis and white supremacists. And we've seen that over and over, especially in Europe, when people are protesting the crime and the raping sprees of these immigrants.
Yes.
And what the media over there does is they say, oh, you're just a bunch of neo-Nazis. They even went to the trouble, the media. There was a young man who went to the defense of a woman, a white woman who was being raped by a Somali immigrant. And the young man had tried to stop it. He was stabbed to death. And what the media did, instead of saying, oh, look, this shouldn't have happened. What's this immigrant doing here in the first place, raping this poor woman? No, the media shows up at the door of the father of the slain young man who heroically tried to protect this woman, right? And with cameras and microphones in his face, they were basically telling him his son was a Nazi, right? And so the point of relevance is, because Mr. Floyd was a black man, they can't use that angle. So if they're going to deploy Antifa and groups like it, the agent provocateurs, the only thing they can conceivably do is redirect the anger, because the anger right now is directed towards the cops who are the enforcers of the institutions, and they don't want the anger to go in that direction. They want the anger to go to the climate change deniers. They want the anger to be directed at those who don't want to wear masks. They want the anger to be directed at those who want to end these lockdowns, okay? So this is an example of the system coming apart at the seams. That out of control, rage-filled reptilian hybrid cop, because folks, these are, these elite bloodlines that we're talking about, they look outwardly human, but if you know what to look for as far as facial features, and I'm not trying to create a witch hunt here, okay, but if you know what you're looking at from the standpoint of hybridism and the energy.
Yes, there's a couple people in my life, it's very apparent. They're not in my personal circle, but I've met them, and it is a mother and her 26-year-old son. They're thumbprints of each other. It is so bizarre.
Yeah.
And and their features, it's just not, well, none of us, we're all GMOs, frankly. But you know what I'm saying? There's more heavy species influence among certain segments of the population and bloodlines, family bloodlines. So
that's right.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And because they use these personality profiles to determine in the recruiting process who are the psychopaths that want to become cops. And because there's an entity spiritual overlay scenario where these entities working through all these rage-filled wannabe cops guide them to the police forces in the first place.
Yes.
And they want to fill their ranks with psychopaths because it's all about oppression. And then what happens, fast forward to the other day, poor Mr. Floyd is murdered right there in broad daylight. It sets off first these protests, and the protests quickly turned violent. And I'm trying to make a point here, folks, about Marianne pointed out how the system is starting to lose control. This is an example of that, okay? Because if it had been a white person, and white people are killed by cops all the time, in their own homes, in their own garages, in their own yards. We don't hear about that because the mainstream narrative is all about hate on whitey. It's all about, well, the whites are responsible for this. It's all about racism. It's all about atomization, fragmentation, division, acrimony.
Yes, they want the different segments of the population being on each other instead
That's
of,
right.
let's
So
fight.
so when you see all these people, including many white people, running around, right? And we're not going to talk about the looting and all the crime that's going on, but the fact that across the board, people of all colors, of all ethnic backgrounds, are literally up in arms about what happened to poor Mr. Floyd. Even in LA now, the cops are getting harassed over there. And this comes on the heels of these very switched on, compassionate cops in the recent past, some of them who have recent combat experience, saying, what I'm observing with my fellow cops across America is not good. They're, taking away people's basic constitutional rights. I want the cops all across the country to look at themselves in the mirror and not be a part of this. Well, those cops that have spoken out like this, they've been fired. Right?
Fired. I have to say, I want to interject here. Just the other day, I popped into one of my local stores and I saw a policeman's car outside, and I thought, I always take my mask with me, but most of the time I've only worn it like twice during this whole period. And I thought, okay. And I was so pleased to see that he wasn't wearing a mask when I actually saw him in the store. And it's like, yes. And I've noticed that among the police force here in Houston. I'm very pleased with the overall response here in town. So I want to make that point too. But unfortunately, I also sense that the ones that are taking steps are not necessarily, we're not necessarily going to hear about it like the two cases that I know about that you just touched on, where they made videos and talked about it, and then, oh yes, we support you, and then boom, fired. So you're exactly right. The whole thing is crumbling.
It's crumbling, so they're going to have to redirect the anger. So if it's possible, about the only thing I can see them doing is like using some of their Antifa types to attack white people, and having the media spin it all around when people are defending themselves. Oh, this has got to do with white supremacy again,
Right.
instead of clouding the issue, moving the goalposts, because the reason for all this was because of this reptilian hybrid cop who murdered the guy in broad daylight, who happened to be black, and inflamed all these passions, these latent passions that were there to begin with, right? And it was an excuse and a justification to really go out in force and protest this. And now what's happened is, the people are firebombing the police station and stuff, and it's gotten out of control because they can't, the narrative they wanted to do is aim to direct the anger at the enemies of their control system. But now the anger is directed towards the enforcers of the control system.
Yes.
That's a game changer. So this reptilian hybrid cop who did this, it's like he has no idea the forces he's unleashed, right?
Exactly.
And that's why I do feel that they're losing control. They're going to try all these methods, and the media is already spinning it out like it's a black versus white thing, moving the goalposts. clouding the issue. No,
The race card,
it's
yes.
the race card because it's an emotional thing. There's a lot of simple-minded social justice warriors. This is all part of the revealing, Marianne. This is all
Oh, yeah.
part of this apocalyptic scenario. We have to remember that there are entities and forces and archontic spirits all around that move in and out of people, jump in and out of people,
Yeah.
use people as a medium through which to affect changes here on the surface. So what we're seeing is this effort at creating this draconian Borg society where everyone is microchipped, implanted. They are really dumbed down. They're just subservient, and they're being eliminated because there's a culling of the population at work. I do believe, and I've talked about this in other podcasts, that these controllers, they're operating under a celestially driven timetable. They know that these celestially driven cataclysms, they are cyclical. They come by every 12,000 years, and we're right on the cusp of them coming back again. And that's going to represent a major reset. Uh, Bernard Gunther was talking about on his Facebook wall about how he's had dreams, and I've had these dreams too, of tsunamis just coming, over and just washing across the land. But he's such a spiritually evolved guy that in his dream he turned the fear around. Like, instead of
Yeah.
trying to run away from the tsunami like I would have done if I had a dream, he was like kind of surfing on it and saying this is a cleansing. And that's the way the Hopi look at it. This is a cleansing. It's a great cleansing that needs to take place, and boy howdy does this planet need a cleansing.
Well, and I touched on some of the different cultures and their versions of this. The Hopi they speak to the five worlds. They, at one point, were affiliated with the Aztec, who refer to the five suns, S-U-N-S. There's any number of these different cultures' versions of this whole thing playing out. And people need to understand, and again, this isn't fear-mongering, that a heck of a lot of mind-body complexes are going to die in this process. And the point I'm trying to make is that, yes, we must take precautionary measures to protect ourselves and our loved ones at the material layer of being. Without a doubt, to do whatever you can. But it's also up to us who are true self-mastery warrior souls, whatever you want to call yourself, doesn't matter. That everything that we're being shown, all the things we're talking about today, and many more that we can't possibly touch on, they're showing us that traditional responses are not going to be the fix. And of course, we're not doing this ourselves, but our roles in this right now do have an impact on what's going on. This is exactly why the overseers go out of their way to try to control. It's not just a loose fest. I mean, that's the baseline level. It always gets down to tweaking emotions, as you said, to trigger certain co-creational responses so that the collective end up co-creating the reality that the overseers want. They don't do it themselves.
They can't do it
They
themselves. That's a
can't. They don't
brilliant
have the
point.
power. Exactly.
They don't have the power. There's not enough of them. They need the acquiescence, obedience, and submission of all these people that they've shunted into the reptilian part of the brain, the victim aggressor mode, right?
Yes.
The point and shriek mode. This person doesn't have their mask on, and so now they've shunted all these people into the reptilian brain, and it's like a force multiplier, as they call it in the army and the military. So these people are now, they've been co-opted, and they're now their legions to enforce these draconian rules, or try to, on others. But like we said, cracks are starting to appear in the dam. The cops that I mentioned, they're both combat veterans, and one of them said, he was speaking from the heart. He was talking to his fellow cops in the video. You don't want to be in a war with the American people.
Yes.
There's too many Americans. They know how to use weapons, and I pointed out in some of my podcasts that all the problems they had trying to put down the Taliban, all the problems they had trying to put down the North Vietnamese, it never worked.
Never.
Because for say Iran to win, going to try to start another war with Iran pretty soon.
Yep.
For Iran to win, quote unquote, and I'm not the one that came up with this concept, others have, but they're absolutely right. All Iran has to do is survive as a integrated country and maintain its social fabric. If they survive, despite the hammering they're going to take from the forces arrayed against them, they're still going to win. Whereas it's going to be constant hemorrhage and a bleeding out of resources, of cannon fodder in the form of airmen, marines, soldiers, and sailors. Right. So we have this weird dichotomy at work where all these draconian measures are being enforced upon the populaces of Australia, of the UK, of America, throughout the Western world, throughout the whole world. But at the same time, they're gearing up for an expansion of these wars that have been going on
Oh,
for a long
exactly.
time now.
And I think that, the plays that they've taken, it was also sudden, it was almost like, to me, and you and I both well know, James, that this kind of thing they've been trying to pull together for years. In particular, this whole pandemic kind of thing. They've tried this so many times, and it's been as concerted an effort as it might seem on the surface. It's been, again, I get the sense it's kind of this hodgepodge. We're just going to throw everything in the soup, and they're desperate. They're desperate. And yes, certain aspects of it and certain players in all this are, you know, the Gates, the Faucis, the the true demonic representations in this, the big players that we see. There's much bigger players behind the scenes. But it's everything sort of feeling desperate to me on their part, which tells me, again, that goes back to the things are kind of falling apart, falling out of control. And I'm not saying they've lost complete control of what's going on, but they're just desperate, and they're just pulling out all the stops, and it's a little bit sloppy at times. And these two officers, I just admire the heck out of both of them, and standing up. And we need more people actually taking stands to do that, although it doesn't have to look that way. You and I were talking about this. You can take a stand in a number of different ways, but the biggest stand you need to take, and I'm talking just now, was referring to the material layer of being, like these gentlemen. But it's time to take a stand, and I don't even necessarily refer to it at the spiritual level. I'm just going to use that word, but the consciousness level, to realign, as you refer to it. I love your reference here, the boots on the ground souls, the boots on the ground that are here to counterpoise all of this. That's the real work at hand here. Yes, you take steps, appropriate steps, and only you know what those are in your life at the material layer of being, to protect yourself and your loved ones and to get out and about. But the only answer at this point, all that I see is shouting that there's only one way to play our, quote, hand in all of this in response. And, it's about going inward and reattuning to that and being warriors in that way. And then when we're attuned to essence layer wisdom or spirit or whatever you call that, that's when we are perfect receptors and transducers of intuition.
Yes.
Not the mind,
Yes.
not the gut, intuition. Because that supersedes all of everything else, emotions. And, gut is usually in deeply primordial instinct, which at this point in time doesn't always serve us very well. It can. I'm not saying that we ignore it, but intuition is the top of the list, folks.
It is, because thinking is too slow, and trying to think our way through some of these problems
Right.
instead of intuitively navigating our way around them, right? Because the idea is not to run headlong into enemy strongholds, right? The idea is to, that's why it would behoove people to study the work of Sun Tzu,
Oh,
and also particularly this book written by a Marine Brigadier General by the name of Griffiths, if memory serves, Sam Griffith, and he wrote a book about Sun Tzu, and he added his own commentary to the points that Sun Tzu was making. And yeah, that information that Sun Tzu provided so long ago is apropos for what we're going through now.
Yes.
Because you wanted me to talk also about the ET element as well.
Yes.
Now, what's important to understand, folks, is whenever we've had these cycles and periods of uh, strife, of whether it's famine, whether it's strife, whether it's, the bottom line is a lot of human suffering, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of depopulation all across the board. Throughout history, these UFOs, these ET craft, the beings themselves have made their presence known.
Oh,
And
forever.
yeah, like there were key battles in the American Civil War, the Chattanooga campaign in Tennessee, when there was a big globe-shaped,
Oh, yes.
spherical-shaped object, which my mentor Barbara Bartlett called the um, the soul repositories,
Mm.
where they would keep, the souls of the recently departed, especially from battlefields. They would siphon them up, right? And also the Battle of Fredericksburg in Virginia, which was a horrific battle.
Oh, yeah.
Many casualties, and there were like UFOs flying around all over the place. And World War II, of course, the pilots of both the Axis and Allied sides were seeing so-called Foo Fighters, and not just like orbs and blobs of light, but
No.
actual full-on structured craft. I mean, they were all over the place. And point of relevance is we're at that stage now where we're undergoing a worldwide flap, a UFO flap, increase in UFO sightings. And
Oh,
one
yeah.
of the things the skeptics try to say is, oh, well, that's just DARPA. That's nonsense, because DARPA is the descendant of the Joint Army Navy Research and
Yeah.
Development Board, which itself we know was deeply involved in alien technology with the reverse engineering of recovered alien craft. We know this from the testimony of actual scientists and engineers who, like Dr. Robert Sarbarker, who was a Pentagon consultant in the 1950s, identified a number of top world famous scientists and engineers who were involved in this effort. Dr. John von Neumann, he mentioned Oppenheimer, he mentioned uh, a number of other people that are well known in scientific historical circles. So DARPA is the lineal descendant of the Joint Army Navy Research and Development Board. So, to say that DARPA is creating all this stuff and it's all fake and it's got nothing to do with aliens, that's like putting the cart before the horse, folks. That's just being ignorant of the real history involved. So these aliens, a lot of them never went anywhere. They've had permanent bases here on Earth, underground, undersea.
Yes.
But because of this flux situation, because the membrane, the veil between worlds are thinning, I think and because of what's going down here, we're on the verge of, the celestially driven cataclysms coming back. There's already a mass culling of the surface population underway. It seems like, especially the more archontic, negative parasitic ETs, it's like they want their pound of flesh too. They want to get their piece of the pie. But on the
Everybody is after their piece of the pie right
everyone's also, but you made a good point, and I like to call it, assignment Earth. If you had to be anywhere where you could make a stand and make a difference in this multiverse, Earth is the place to be. This is where the bottleneck is. This is where the cork is in the bottle that's maintaining this recyclement of souls
now.
and the reincarnation process coming back over and over into an archon-controlled world, the demiurge world that the Gnostics talked about. So if there's a place to be to make a difference, folks, you're at it. You're at the place where you can make a difference, and it's with a heart. And just keeping yourself in a place where no matter what's going on around you, you still maintain your inner solitude, your inner, no, not solitude, but your
Stillness.
inner, yeah, exactly. You still feel good about yourself. You have situational awareness. You recognize what's going on around you, but that's why you're here. It's assignment Earth. And
Well,
you're a game changer and you're a frequency buster. That's why you're here, folks.
well, and you touched on the bottom line with Barbie's story about the soul collection and
Yes,
reincarnation.
yes.
That's what they want, to continue trapping forever the soul, because that is the source of loose that they're really after. You know, there's negative emotions and all of those energies. And yes, a number of the lower on the, lower in the hierarchical pyramid, they feed on those energies. But those who are higher up, what they're really after is the high vibration, energetic emanations of the soul's genome, that pure, what I call the highest form, highest expressed form of vital energy of unexpressed consciousness. But that, in other words, energies that scientists have no clue about. This high vibration energy that the soul's genome puts out. And this is the purpose of the reincarnation system, the entrapment and that, and all of that. And literally seeking to, and that's one of the major things that the reincarnation system does. And there's, trauma here on this planet can cause soul trauma, splintering, that sort of thing. But the reincarnation system itself is horribly traumatic for souls. And once a soul becomes too splintered, it gets to the point, it's kind of like Humpty Dumpty. You can't put it back together again, even through soul retrievals and so forth, because unlike our spirit, if you will, what I call our core self, that is untouchable, so to speak, that stillness that you just were speaking to, James, the soul is, quote, impressible. The soul is affectable, if you will. So that's the name of the game here. That's the bottom line. And so we have to respond to that in kind. Those of us who are here to counterpoise this, to get in the flow of this transition. The soul level work has to be done. In terms of the rest, touching on a couple of other things here, James. I'm totally aware. There's been a lot of postings from all over the world now, crowd level sightings, just left and right. If you would please speak to that, and if you're aware of any increase directly in terms of alien and MILAB abductions, and any other types of alien related sightings, and then we're going to wrap up with the timeline thing. So.
Yes, as you alluded to, Marianne, there's a worldwide surge in UFO sightings, and sometimes there's multiple crafts seen at the same time.
Yes.
And apparently there's a big event that happened in Brazil. I haven't had the chance to look at the video yet, but apparently there was a major event that I have to delve into. I think it may even involve the UFO crash. So I'll let you know more about that as time goes on. I just have not had the time to study the available information. But what I'm also hearing from others, and sometimes just perusing people's posts on Facebook, that they're describing an upsurge of spiritual warfare attacks in their sleep, in their dream state. So again, because of the thinning of the veils, a lot of these archontic parasitic beings that feed off the loosh of people, when they engender these negative emotions in the dream state, fear, anxiety, loss, et cetera, they get a feed off that. It keeps us disempowered. It keeps us tired and worn out, and it feeds them. And because of all the stuff that's going on, the pumping of all these harmful emissions and toxins into the environment, I think it really provides a fertile ground for a lot of these archontic beings of all stripes, whether they're non-corporeal, interdimensional, if you will, but also the more corporeal kind of beings. I think what's going on also, because of the boots on the ground aspect of it, I don't want to sound like there's, like factions, us against them, good guys versus bad guys.
Not that at all. That is, we miss the point when we take that approach. Exactly.
We miss the point when we take that approach, but the fact is that there's been cosmic wars going back, down throughout the ages.
As above, so below.
Yeah,
Yes.
as above, so below. That's where all these stories come from, the Hindu epics,
Hmm.
uh, throughout throughout the lore of the entire planet, there's always been these stories and this lore about the wars of gods and men, for lack of a better term, right? So what we're seeing now is kind of just the latest rendition of that. It's not so much the Western powers wanting to war against the Chinese, for example. It's the Western reptilian hybrid elites wanting to, you know, increase their standing vis-a-vis the reptilian hybrids running China. Okay, so it's
Exactly. And stepping back a higher level, going higher level than that, this is regressive qualities of consciousness that
yes,
have built exponentially in momentum, seeking to, quote, consume progressive consciousness.
yes, that's absolutely right. That's why they make a point of targeting people that have this progressive in the proper context, not the progressive CIA liberal
No, no, no.
context. No, no, because it's another inversion when you use those, when one uses those terms. But the regressive versus the progressive in this standpoint, there's a bottleneck here that I alluded to earlier of all these souls that keep endlessly getting recycled here.
Yes.
And because the controllers, they want to keep this. Think of it as Animal Farm. Think of it as like a large terrarium, a leash factory.
Yes.
And so, in order for us to break out and go back to the stars whence we came, we have to dismantle this paradigm. And I'm not suggesting that it's going to be a mass prison break. That's not going to happen. I don't think. I'm not
I
trying to
I
be
tend
put a
to
negative spin
agree.
on it,
Right.
but I think that those who put in the work and put in the effort, they're going to give themselves the best possibility to make a breakout, right? Of breaking out of this entrapment of this recycling process. And while we still have time, I want to talk about the timeline, alternate
Yes.
reality aspect to it, because many people, sometimes being used by military controllers, sometimes of their own accord, from oversoul kind of higher dimensional perspective, in our dreams sometimes, and in our sleep state, some of us can actually go into these alternate realities.
Yes.
And I really do believe that some of these realities may be further down in a linear timeline sense, further down the track than we are, or a little further back
Hmm.
compared to us where we're at now from our perspective. But we can see some parallels and some similarities. I do believe meaningful change can be affected in these alternate realities. When we go in these alternate realities, some of us in the dream state or what have you, I think that we can glean a lot of useful, actionable intelligence, if you will. And I
Yes.
think that things could be done not only in this linear time frame from a time travel sense, going forward in time, going back in time, to which these ETs in the military do all the time. And through their Hollywood, they try to frighten us into thinking, well, if you muck around with time, then you can change things so badly that you may not even exist and your whole family may not even exist. But a lot of that, from what the information that we've gleaned, is a lot of that is Hollywood fear mongering. That
Yes.
because we know that the military and the ETs muck with time all the time,
All
right?
the time.
No pun intended. But they have managed to create. Have managed to create these alternate realities, because I myself have experienced the Mandela effect. A lot of things that I experienced, I know for a fact happened when in my younger days. History seems to have changed,
I agree.
and
I've been around a long
yeah,
time too, and it's evident.
yes, but that's looking at from our timeline perspective, from a alternate reality, alternate timeline perspective. I do believe that meaningful positive changes can be affected
Yes.
when we go into these alternate realities, either from an oversoul perspective or what have you, and conduct some ops there. And some of your listeners are already doing this, I'm absolutely certain. So whatever you're doing, keep doing it.
Doing.
And like in some of my alternate reality scenarios, I've seen zombie kind of meltdowns where there's zombies all over the place. And then you never know with what they're pumping into people, what's being put into people's bodies or maybe put into people's bodies. These things may happen in our reality, but I think that they've already happened in other timelines, in alternate realities. To cite but one example of these zombie things, and like we already have like flakka outbreaks where people get involved with these designer drugs and they get taken up by entities, and then they
Right.
perform superhuman feats, and they turn into cannibals, and that's already happening, folks. And there's
Right.
there's a whole subpopulation of people that are like that right now. Okay, so that's not even talking about genetic manipulation or anything. We're just talking about someone had a supernatural spiritual understanding that if they created a concoction, called it flakka or bath salts or whatever, and then disseminated it through all these subpopulations, subcultures, some of them would turn into cannibalistic zombies, basically.
Zombies. We're talking
Yes,
zombies. Everybody
we're
thinks it's a
talking.
big joke, but it isn't.
Yeah, it's out. Look up flakka. Look up. You can find these on YouTube. These flakka zombies. They're all over the place, really. So it's been a delightful conversation
Yes,
with
James,
you,
and
and
thank
I'm
you.
really looking forward for you to come on my show again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your time. I know you are on a schedule here. I won't keep you, but we truly appreciate you. I know the listeners do too, and all of the work that you do. And thank you so much for taking time out with me today and our listeners. Uh, we value your insight so much and your experience, and just love you, James. Um, so thank you again. And I'm going to wrap real quickly. And invite those of you who are not aware of the new uh, the program that I'm offering. For those of you who need assistance in cleaning house, you got to choose. You got to draw your line in the sand. This is the time for that. The days of fence sitting are over for those of us who are here and know why we're here. And this program provides an opportunity for those of you who may need some assistance, because we have to do some house cleaning too, shadow work and so forth, to be able to really access and be attuned to our soul and core self, and to be able to, quote, fulfill our missions. So I've included a link below, and I invite you to check it out if you haven't already. It's an amazing program, amazing opportunity for you, and it's very accessible. So take care, James. Give my love to Kylie and your sweet little one. And thank you, listeners, for joining us. Bye for now.